If Scream 7 can reveal that Sidney has an 18-year-old daughter, then Stu Macher surviving, serving time, and then returning doesn't actually sound ridiculous. Hear me out.
In your dreams.
Hi guys, my name's Barry and welcome back to the channel. Let's start with the elephant in the room. If Stu Macher survived, why is nobody talking about him in any of the future Scream movies from Scream 2 to Scream 6? Surely someone would have mentioned that Stu Macher survived. It's too big of a news point that they wouldn't not talk about it. Well, they did talk about it in Scream 6 when they said that Stu Macher possibly died, he's possibly alive, and there was kind of fan theories within the movie that Stu Macher survived the events of Scream 1. Apart from that, that's the only time they ever really spoke about him. Every time they spoke about previous killers, even in Scream 1, they always mentioned Billy Loomis is dead, we killed Billy Loomis, Billy this, Billy that. We never really spoke about Stu Macher. If we look at Scream 4, Scream 5, and even Scream 6, they never ever mentioned that Sidney Prescott had an older daughter. They didn't mention that she didn't have an older daughter, which then in this case, in Scream 7, they can introduce her older daughter as an 18-year-old teenager. She obviously had kids in Scream 5, and she mentioned that she had kids in Scream 5. They didn't mention how old they all were. There's obviously a kid in the buggy in Scream 5, so we can assume that she's just kind of a baby, but we don't know how many other kids she has and what age they are. Because of the events of Scream 5, it wouldn't at all be ridiculous for Sidney to have an 18-year-old daughter with the events of Scream 7, assuming Scream 7 takes place in modern day. But because we had Scream 4, she didn't mention that she had a daughter. Now, of course, if she had an 18-ish year old daughter in Scream 7, then of course she would be alive, she would be a baby in Scream 4, but Sidney never mentions that she had a kid. She never even mentions that she was married to a guy called Mark. She never mentions any of her private life, but just because she doesn't mention it doesn't mean she doesn't have any. And that takes us back to Stu Macher. Just because they don't mention him surviving, just because they don't mention him being behind bars, doesn't mean he's not alive, and doesn't mean he doesn't serve his time. Now, you might be asking, well, if he's alive, then surely he's a suspect. Well, no, he wouldn't be a suspect in Scream 5 and 6 because he's behind bars or potentially behind bars. So if you've got a man who's serving time behind bars, why mention him being a suspect when you know exactly where he is? But with all time being served behind bars, or most of the time, you eventually do get out. And with Stu Macher, there is no proof that he killed anyone in Scream 1. For all we know, and for all they know, it was Billy Loomis that was responsible for all the killings in Scream 1. And because Stu Macher is so crazy, maybe he spent less time behind bars. Maybe he had a defense where they said, well, he was crazy, he was coerced to do this by Billy Loomis or even Roman Bridger, or he didn't kill anyone. That's their defense. And regardless of what happened, he would have had to have spent some time behind bars. And let's assume he spent 25 years behind bars. That would be from 1996 to 2021, roughly, that he served time behind bars, just in time for the events of Scream 5 to unfold. Now, the reason I mention that is because Stu Macher could, if he's alive, he could potentially have been behind the events of Scream 5 and Scream 6. I don't mean he's went out and killed everyone and it's his responsibility, but he could have had a hand in what Richie and Amber done in Scream 5, and that leads us up to Scream 7. Obviously, with Scream, Wayne Bailey was responsible for his own killings because of what happened to Richie, but it could have been Stu that caused Richie and Amber to do what they did. After all, it was Stu's house, and we obviously see Stu's house in Scream 7. Now, I'm not going to get into how Stu survived the events of Scream 1. I did do an in-depth video as to how he could have survived the events of Scream 1. If you want to see it, I'll try and link it somewhere if you want to watch it. But it is possible for someone to survive what he went through in the events of Scream 1. And of course, this is a horror franchise and it's a fictional movie, so that gives the realm of possibility of survival an even greater chance. But why now? Why bring Stu Macher back into this franchise? Well, the time was right to bring Sidney Prescott back. They've made this a more intimate style story. It's all or mostly adults that we will be dealing with in this movie. Of course, Sidney has her daughter and her friends, and they'll all be picked off one by one, or they'll all be classed as suspects at one point in this film. But it feels like a more mature movie that we're seeing this time, especially compared to Scream 5 and Scream 6. Sidney Prescott is the main character. We do have a 50-year-old woman as the main character in this movie. So it's all about her and her family surviving. And there's only so many times that you can bring in new characters to mimic old characters and give us the excuse that, oh, I want to copy these people, or I want to be the main character in your world. There's only so many times that you can bring that out in a Scream movie, but it does grate on you eventually. Eventually, you're going to have to get someone who miraculously survived the events of another Scream movie. That would require a retcon. And for that person to come back to try and kill Sidney off, it has to be something personal. It has to be something that somebody comes back for a reason to kill Sidney Prescott, and it's personal. And what better character to do that than Stu Macher? He would have served his time behind bars, 25 years again, like I've mentioned. Let's say he spends 25 years behind bars, being a good boy, not doing anything wrong, serving his time quietly, and then getting out, maybe even getting a new identity in a different state until he decides, you know what? Now is the time. I know where Sidney Prescott is, and I'm coming after her. With retcons, you can even fix the wrongs within the franchise. I know that Amber killing Dewey, officially Amber has killed Dewey, but I know that that doesn't sit well with a lot of people, and it doesn't sit well with me because Dewey is a fantastic character and he deserved more than someone like Amber. So if you wanted to, you could retcon that scene. It wouldn't really make much of a difference, but if you want to show that Stu was part of that movie in Scream 5 without actually being there, then they could make it that Stu did kill different people and Dewey could be one of them. I also feel like it fits thematically that Stu would be the one to return because you've got Sidney Prescott and her daughter and her husband. So it's a family movie. Well, it's a family for them. So it's a family orientated Scream movie. Then you've got Stu Macher, and there are rumours that Leslie Macher is coming into this movie because she was mentioned in Scream 5. And if that's the case, then it's family versus family. The Machers versus Sidney Prescott's family. I can't remember Mark's last name. What's Mark's last name? Don't know, but Sidney is obviously part of that family anyway. So it's the Machers versus Sidney's family. And I think we will get some sort of focus on something like that because we do see Stu's house, like I said, in the trailer. And obviously Matthew Lillard is coming back as Stu Macher. We don't know to what extent, if it's going to be AI, if it's going to be just a voice changer, if it's going to be a flashback scene only, or if he's coming back in the flesh as Stu. But going back to the original point is, if you can bring an 18-year-old daughter into the fold, then the realms of possibility are Stu Macher could have been alive without talking about him. Sidney Prescott coming into Scream 4 and not saying, oh, I've got a daughter who is 3 years old or whatever, then you can easily say, well, if you can do that without actually telling the audience, then you can also bring Stu back without telling the audience, oh, by the way, Stu survived. Because it doesn't make sense for Sidney to walk up to someone and say, hi there, I'm Sidney and I've got a 3-year-old daughter. And it's the same with saying, hi there, just to let you know, Stu Macher is behind bars and he's going nowhere. Yes, you can do that. And they chose not to do that. And that's a perfect opportunity to give us that retcon that Stu is alive. Because let's face it, Sidney having an 18-year-old daughter in Scream 7 is a retcon. Whether you think it is or not because of what happened in Scream 5, it's a retcon because they never mentioned her having a daughter in Scream 4. So it's officially a retcon. So if you can retcon that, then you can retcon Stu. So what are your thoughts on that, guys? What are your thoughts on retcons overall, especially in the Scream franchise? Because the Scream franchise has obviously been very consistent over the years. We haven't had remakes for Scream. We haven't had specific reboots, etc. It has been a continuous story all the way through, even when Neve Campbell hasn't been in the movies, it still has been consistent overall. I think that's what I love about the Scream franchise. But what are your thoughts on Sidney miraculously having an older daughter? And what are your thoughts on, because of that, is there room for Stu Macher to come back? As always, leave your thoughts and opinions down below. Let me know what you think, and I'll talk to you soon.
I'll be right back.
What are you waiting for, huh?
Coming to get you, Barbara.
Ever played in the cat?
Someone's in the back!